Hey everybody, Steve here. Sorry my voice is a little raspy today. I did a lot of singing this past weekend. But over the last couple months, I've been on sort of a quest to find a replacement for Finale ever since it got announced that program was getting discontinued last year. And I've already made a few videos on some of the more popular options out there. But my research also clued me into a few little curiosities that kind of piqued my interest. And today we're going to talk about the first of those, which is a text-based music notation program called LilyPond. And yeah, you heard that right, a text-based music notation application, which is honestly something I didn't even think was possible until I ran into LilyPond in the wild. In fact, when I first read that, I thought to myself, surely they mean it's like an application with a text editor, right? Maybe something similar to early versions of Finale or Sibelius. But no, they mean it text-based, meaning you actually write text and then convert it into notation. And it turns out that not only was this possible, but it was way easier than I thought it was going to be. So even if you don't think this application is for you, I recommend sticking around to the end because I think you'll be surprised by the process of using LilyPond and also by the final result. So let's jump into it. So when I first found out that there exists a text-based music notation program in 2025, the first question I had was why? I mean, what possible reason could there be not to have a graphical user interface for writing music? And would writing music in text even be possible? The whole thing seemed kind of insane to me, but after looking into it for a while, I learned a few things. For one, LilyPond's roots go back to the mid-90s, when an idea like this maybe wouldn't have seemed so crazy. Although I should probably point out that GUIs had existed for a while at that point, and even Finale's first release in 1988 had an early version of one. Looks a little primitive now, I know, but at the time I'm pretty sure every application out there looked pretty close to something like that. So after a bit of research, I learned that there are a few additional reasons the application is designed this way. For one, LilyPond is open source, which means it has no official owner or parent company. So its more simplistic nature allows it to be built upon and added to by other users, doing things like fixing bugs and even adding graphical interfaces, which is something I will talk about in a second. Secondly, the application is designed to be extremely precise while still mimicking that old practice of writing scores by hand. According to the developers, not having a graphic interface somehow helps with this, although I have some confusion as to why. But I'm not a programmer, so I'm going to take their word for it. And finally, they claim that text-based file formats are more resistant to being corrupted, either by time or by other means, meaning there's less of a chance of you losing your files than with other more complex applications. Again, I don't really know enough about computers to know if this is true or not, but I can see the benefits of not having a proprietary file format that could maybe one day just stop being maintained. Something that I'm actually a little bit worried about for some old Finale files I now have lying around. I think I should explain a little bit more about what text-based means. This isn't like a text prompt or AI-related thing. Instead, LilyPond essentially converts a certain type of code, for the lack of a better word, into sheet music. Now, luckily, I have a little bit of experience with programming, as it is something I sort of picked up during the COVID lockdowns to keep myself sane. Harvard actually has a few online courses you can take for free, which was a lifesaver back during that time. This was good news for me trying to figure out LilyPond, since I already knew some of the basic rules and structures for doing simple programming exercises. Although I would be curious to know if anyone out there started using LilyPond without any prior programming knowledge, and if so, how your experience was trying to learn it from scratch. Okay, so right off the bat, just from reading about how LilyPond worked, I knew I wasn't going to be able to tackle it the same way I have the other applications I've been covering. As I've mentioned in previous videos, I gave myself 3 different tasks of varying complexity with the goal of at least trying to do all 3 of them just using each application's interface and not looking up anything online. I knew this wasn't going to be possible with LilyPond since there are dozens of text expressions and code syntaxes I needed to know in order to just get the basic functionality of the application working. So this one is going to be a little bit different than the others. Luckily though, there is a lot of documentation out there, both on LilyPond's website and on the Music Stack Exchange forums. So I always had to have another screen open and pretty much had to search for every single thing I wanted to do. Although, as I will mention, this wasn't really the case the entire time. A bit of a weird hurdle I had to get over is LilyPond's installation process. Since it isn't a full-blown graphical application, there really isn't an install process in the normal sense. You can basically just download the files and it will run on any compatible device. At first, this kind of confused me as I was looking through all the folders searching for an install icon or something that I would recognize, but nope, just download and there you go. In partner to what you downloaded, you also need a text editor to do the actual writing. You can apparently use any simple text editor to write LilyPond code, so I decided to use Windows' tried and true method, Notepad. Okay, so here is some very basic LilyPond code that I typed up. This all took me a long time to figure out, and I am sure I'm going to be making several huge mistakes, but I will do my best to explain what I know. Very basically, entering notes in LilyPond is essentially the same process as coding in a language like C or C++. You start with what are usually called includes that basically define what version and language you are using, along with some more specific information like paper size and layout. Again, there would be no way to know any of this specific coding syntax without reading through tons of documentation, so maybe keep that in mind if LilyPond is something you were thinking of trying out. The header function here, or at least I think it's called a function, but let me know if there's a more appropriate name, is where you would add things like the title and composer name along with other text like subtitles, etc. And then finally you would enter the actual music with this function here. This is also where you would put things like the key and the time signature and the tempo. Now, from all the reading I did, it at least seems like this relative entry mode is the most commonly used, or at least the most recommended. From what I was able to understand, this mode assumes that most of the notes you're entering into the score are likely close by to whatever came before it, so it will place it in the nearest octave to the previous note you just entered. The other option is absolute mode, where you have to be a bit more specific about which octaves you are entering, and I can imagine cases where both may be useful depending on what you were trying to do, but I decided to go with the relative mode to start things out. To actually enter the notes, all you need to do is enter the pitch followed by the duration. But at this point, you might be wondering, how do you actually convert all this text into the actual music? Well, I had the same question, and it took a bit of digging, but I eventually figured it out. One way to do it is with the command line interface here, but I found a more convenient way was to just drag your text file onto the LilyPond shortcut, and bam, look at that. Pretty cool, actually. And just as a side note, if you don't want all your scores popping up in the LilyPond directory, you can do what I did and make a shortcut and change this little option here so it will output everything right to your desktop. So the first thing I noticed doing this is, oh hey, this actually works. I was pretty impressed that it all came out the way it should the first time I used it, but I thought that doing this dragging process over and over to check my work was going to get a bit tedious. So after some more research, I discovered that most people using LilyPond also use a sort of compiling program to get a preview of the score they're working on. One of the more popular ones seems to be Frescobaldi, which I think is named after the Italian composer of the same name. Another really popular one is Dynamo, which I think is more of a full application on its own, and I think I will cover it separately in another video. Anyways, once I got this application and pasted my code in, then I could really see what was going on and was able to quickly get to work on the rest of the score. I have to say that one really unique thing about using LilyPond is this really strange sense of accomplishment and pride you get when you finally get something to show up the way you wanted. That's not really something I've even considered when using other applications, but here, once you've troubleshot everything in the code, hitting the engrave option here and seeing it show up on the right is incredibly rewarding. And I really have to say the whole process was actually pretty fun to do. Another thing that might really not come across here is that note entry in this way is actually really fast. In fact, I can say that out of every other application I've used so far, entering notes in code like this is faster than any other method I've come across. You kind of get into this groove of entering the pitch, followed by an F for a flat, an S for a sharp, or nothing for a natural note, and end it with a duration, so 4 for a quarter note or 8 for an eighth note, etc. Rests are notated with an R followed by the duration as well. You can type this all out really easily, and after a while it sort of becomes this almost mechanical task that goes by really quick. This is great, however, it's sort of balanced out with the time you lose trying to fine-tune the octaves of the notes and the bar and system spacing, which I will talk about in a minute. I have a feeling that, like all coding languages, this kind of stuff would get way easier to do once you become more familiar with LilyPond's language, but I thought it was something I should mention anyways. Sort of ironically, despite it being a text editor, I had almost an easier time formatting this lead sheet in LilyPond than I did in some of the other applications I've made videos for. I again had to do some reading on what the exact code should be, but you can pretty easily customize the look of the score by entering margins and system spacing here, and by other little tricks like this code here where V space stands for vertical space. A couple other little tweaks were getting rid of the first system indentation with this code here and removing the bar numbers with this little function here. Again, I have no clue if any of this is best practice or not. This is just what I was able to figure out using my brain and the available documentation. So please let me know if there are better ways to accomplish any of these things. So up to this point, things were really starting to make sense, and I have to admit I was having a pretty good time. The problems with LilyPond came once I finished entering all the notes and wanted to move on to chord entry and customizing the rest of the score. It was here where I sort of realized that the one major downside of using LilyPond is because it is entirely code-based, there aren't really any built-in functions or tools that you can rely on to do even basic score writing tasks. Everything you want to show up on the page has to be coded by you, which at least for me meant that I had to spend a ton more time getting into more complex coding techniques to allow me to get everything done. Now, Frescobaldi does give you a few tools that can help, such as repeats here in this menu, but all that really does is insert the code for you over here. What happened to me was, after I finished all the note input, I went to figure out how to add chords above the staff. I thought maybe there would be a way to insert some code maybe next to or above the code for the actual notes. Maybe something like this, sort of how it really looks on the page. But apparently this isn't the way to do it. It turns out I sort of had to re-engineer the entire score using at least what I thought were pretty complicated programming concepts. So basically, in order to get this done, you have to treat the chart's chords as a separate sort of staff that lives above the normal note staff, and then layer the two staffs on top of each other. In programming, there's this concept of pseudocode, which is basically just a text outline of what you're trying to do, but not really written in any specific coding language. You kind of get this drilled into you when taking even an introductory class in coding, as I did. So I was able to kind of visualize what LilyPond was asking me to do. In pseudocode, it would sort of look like this. You would kind of write the code for the notes and chords separately in two different functions here, and then use another command to layer them on top of each other down here. Now, I had no idea what this code was supposed to be, but I did find some helpful resources online and eventually settled on something like this. So here is the original code for the notes that I did, and here's the code for the chords. Applying this function down here stacks them together and bingo, it works. I will admit this was a bit of a headache to do, but that feeling of accomplishment was still there when I finally got it figured out, even after all that time using the application. Along the exact same lines as this was figuring out slash and rhythm notation, but I was able to find this code online to render a note as a slash, which ended up working pretty well. I am nowhere near a good enough programmer to have figured this out on my own, which once again illustrates this major downside in using LilyPond. Another thing is I had to call this function for each individual slash, so I ended up with part of the code looking like this, which I am pretty sure is not the most efficient way to accomplish what I was trying to do, but it's all I could figure out. If anyone knows of a better way, please let me know. It would really help me out. Interestingly though, when I started working on a slightly more complicated chart, it really wasn't that much more difficult than the previous one. Because the rhythms are more complicated, there ends up being more code, but essentially the process is exactly the same. As I mentioned, I had to look up all the syntax for every little thing I wanted to do, so a note in parenthesis had its own code here, along with accents over here. You could even customize beaming using a bracket like this, although I was a little confused on how that worked. I feel it's a bit arbitrary since I was trying to beam this beat together, but had to have the bracket one note later in the code than I thought it maybe should be. I might be missing something here, but at the end of the day it worked, so I was at least happy with that. Now, as for chord entry, for the most part, it makes perfect sense. Just like the notes, you enter the pitch and duration here, and then the chord quality after a colon. Makes perfect sense considering the way individual notes are added, but I had a bit of a hard time getting extensions to work. For example, I wanted a sharp 11 added to this chord, but couldn't figure out the appropriate syntax to have it display correctly. Even after searching online, I wasn't able to get this one thing right, so if anyone knows a way to do it, please let me know, either in the comments or send me a message on Instagram. Also, as you can see, LilyPond registers major 7 chords as triangles, which is a bit more of an old school way of doing things in my opinion. You'll see that in older versions of the real book, for example. I am sure there's a way to change this, but I just left it as it was for now. I also had a bit of an issue bracketing notes, which is something I have brought up in previous videos. Much like other applications I've used, applying a bracket to a single note is relatively easy, but I couldn't figure out a way to bracket or parentheses a short run of notes. This kind of seems to be a recurring problem, as only 1 or 2 applications out there have an easy way to do this, that I have found at least. So I'm going to admit that before starting the final chart I set for myself to do, which is a short section of a full big band arrangement, I felt a bit like I was staring at an impossible task ahead of me. Was I really going to be able to do this whole thing using code? For a minute I thought about skipping it, but in the end I decided to give it a try. But I knew there was no way I was going to be able to wrap my head around such a large piece of music unless I built a sort of outline or template first. So that's exactly what I did, and here it is. Now, I'm not going to get too into all the details here, but basically I sort of modified an existing jazz combo template I found in LilyPond's documentation, expanding it and adding a few other features. I'll link both the original and my version in the description in the video, and please feel free to check them out and send me some pointers on how I could maybe make it better. This template even transposes the pitches for each instrument as well, which I thought was a pretty cool feature. And this actually brings me to something else I thought about while I was working with LilyPond. I realized that this template I had made would be really easy to share with others. LilyPond does have a special file format, but really, if someone else I knew had the application, all I had to do was email them the actual code, and they could just compile it themselves, or maybe make some changes and email it back to me. I guess under the hood, that's technically what every program would do, but it's just something interesting I thought about. And interestingly, this would probably mean that LilyPond is compatible with Git, which is sort of a versioning software that I think every programmer has at least some knowledge of. Basically, Git allows multiple people to work on the same project at the same time and merge together various changes or updates to the official code. I know a little bit about Git, but it's not really my expertise, although I could imagine a scenario where multiple people could collaborate on a piece of music using LilyPond and then use Git as a way to keep track of all the changes or roll back anything later that they didn't like. Again, if anyone has some insights on this, I would really like to know. Jumping off from this template, everything else went pretty easily. Because LilyPond has a transpose command, as I mentioned before, you can just enter the notes in concert pitch and it will take care of the rest for you, which was pretty nice. I had the same problem with this chart as I did on the previous one, where I couldn't get the chords to spell the way I wanted. This should be an E7 sharp 9 chord, for example, but I just couldn't figure out how to input that into LilyPond. And again, if anyone knows how, please let me know. Two things I really wanted to mention were the drums and the vocals, both of which were incredibly easy to input. In fact, I'm going to go as far as saying that LilyPond handles these two things better than probably any other application that I've used so far. For example, in a previous video on Dorico, I complained that when entering the drums, it was really hard to tell how many voices there actually were or which one you were on. But in LilyPond, this is so clearly spelled out for you, there really isn't a way to get confused. You just make sure you have the different voices here and then adjust the stem directions like this. Incredibly easy and something that I really loved. Similar case with the vocals as well. I was thinking I would have to input each lyric individually above each note, similar to maybe how other applications do it. But in LilyPond, it is way easier than that. You can just enter the lyrics and maybe a symbol or two, and it will input them automatically. A very cool, simple way to do this that really impressed me. There were a couple small things I wanted to do that I ended up deciding were above my head for the time being. For example, I discovered that slurs are entered using parentheses, which is easy enough, but when I tried to figure out how to add a slur in a chord or a double stop, I couldn't get it to work. I did look this up, and once I saw how complex the code looked, I decided it's probably not worth stressing about. Although if I decided to use LilyPond more often, it's something I would probably have to sit down and figure out. I also did a bit of reading on how to extract each individual part from the score. And again, from what I've read, it's totally doable, but the process seemed a bit much for me, so I let it go for now anyways. Out of all the applications I've used so far, I've definitely had the most fun using LilyPond, but it's the kind of fun you get if you're the type of person who enjoys solving puzzles and riddles, which I am. However, I do feel like I'm maybe the perfect audience for something like this. I have a bit of a background in programming and I enjoy kind of little curiosities and figuring them out. And I can imagine that some of the fun I might have had might have been a really bad time for other people out there. So I don't think I could just recommend it to anybody. However, I can see a few really interesting use cases for LilyPond. For example, if you're a teacher, you could teach both coding and musical concepts at the same time, which is something I don't think any other application would allow you to do. And I can also see some cool integrations with other industries, computing for sure, but also robotics. For example, it would be the perfect language for like a Raspberry Pi or Arduino course, or maybe even one of those light and music shows you see at Christmas sometimes, something like that. In either case, I'm really glad I discovered LilyPond, and I would recommend that people at least try it out, especially if you have an interest in either computing or programming. Now, as for rating, I really don't know about this one. I mean, I had a blast using it. I was able to get everything done, but I'm still a little on the fence with how efficient it was to actually complete the tasks I set out to do. So I think I'll give it a 6.5 out of 10, but with a little asterisk, meaning that's just for its target audience, someone maybe like me. I can imagine a lot of people out there who would just not enjoy using an application like this, and I want to make sure that's clear. I'm not one of those people though. I thought it was pretty awesome, and I think I'll keep it installed to kind of mess around with in the future. You don't see a lot of applications like this anymore, and it kind of feels like a bit of a throwback to earlier days of the internet when stuff like this was a lot more common, so that's pretty cool. But anyways, thanks so much for watching, and see you soon.